Today we're unpacking a profound and honestly pretty heartbreaking psychological paradox. Why do incredibly smart, highly self-aware people repeatedly find themselves trapped in toxic relationships? You'd naturally assume that having a high intellect acts like a shield against dysfunction, right? But as we'll explore through our source material today, sometimes the very brilliance of your mind is exactly what keeps you locked in the dark. Your intellect, ironically, becomes the trap.
It almost always starts with a whisper. A quiet, anxious thought that creeps in right after a disagreement, a slight, or just a moment of neglect. You catch yourself asking, am I overreacting? Did I just misunderstand their intentions? There's gotta be a logical explanation for why they treated me that way, right? If you're an overthinker, this internal, anxious monologue probably sounds intensely familiar to you. You feel the sting of the hurt, but instantly, your brain tries to audit the emotion. You're literally subjecting your own anxiety to a rigorous intellectual cross-examination.
And that right there brilliantly illustrates the core insight we're looking at today. When it comes to toxic dynamics, your intelligence becomes a double-edged sword. You see, you aren't staying because you lack awareness. You're definitely not staying because you're weak. You're staying because your brain is actively overriding your gut instinct. Your greatest asset, your capacity to see nuance, to empathize deeply, to solve complex puzzles, is actually working against you. It's negotiating with your own pain.
Section 1. The invisible chains, mechanisms of entanglement. So, how exactly does a brilliant mind trick itself? Well, the first mechanism is cognitive overprocessing. From a brain science perspective, this is your tendency to deeply analyze your emotions rather than just trusting them. And what's fascinating is that the traditional Unani medical perspective beautifully echoes this. It views intense emotional overthinking as something that generates excess heat and dryness in the brain, which actually disrupts your natural temperament, your misage. So instead of feeling the sharp, unmistakable biological signal of hurt, you question it. You ask if there's another angle, maybe a hidden context, or some reason rooted in their childhood trauma. You put your own feelings on trial until your emotional clarity is completely weakened. You exhaust yourself analyzing the pain instead of just listening to the warning it's giving you. Operating right alongside that is emotional investment bias. This powerfully frames our deep human resistance to loss. Think about it. You've poured time, immense effort, emotional bandwidth, and maybe even a piece of your identity into this person. Your brain creates this massive internal resistance to leaving because walking away, that would mean recognizing that heavy investment as a total loss. So you justify staying. Your brain convinces you to stay not because the dynamic is actually healthy, but simply to avoid the heavy grief of walking away empty-handed. And then the trap snaps fully shut with intermittent reinforcement. This is a cycle of unpredictable affection and withdrawal, and it is pure brain science. A prolonged pattern of coldness that's suddenly interrupted by a warm apology or a fleeting flash of deep connection creates profound psychological conditioning. It literally operates exactly like an addiction in the brain. Those rare, unpredictable good moments spike your dopamine. They make you crave that affection so intensely that you become willing to tolerate prolonged, deep distress just to get that next hit. Section 2. The silent descent. Recognizing the symptoms. Once those mechanisms are firmly in place, the slide into toxicity isn't usually some sudden drop off a cliff. It's a slow, quiet fade that progresses in distinct phases. Phase 1 starts with persistent self-doubt. You, a once confident and decisive person, start second-guessing your own perceptions. Your mood becomes almost entirely dependent on their behavior. Then, Phase 2 brings intense rationalization. Phase 3 is social withdrawal. You start isolating yourself. And intelligent people often do this out of shame, knowing on some level that they shouldn't be tolerating this, they hide the dysfunction from their friends. Finally, we hit Phase 4, internal dissonance. This is that quiet, agonizing awareness that something is terribly wrong, paired with a completely paralyzing inability to act on it. Let's actually look a little closer at that second phase because it really is the linchpin of the intelligence trap. Rationalization becomes your primary coping strategy. You start reframing their harmful, destructive behavior as, oh, it's just stress from work, or it was a fundamental misunderstanding, or we're just in a temporary rough patch. Here's a pretty surprising psychological fact for you. Studies suggest that higher cognitive ability actually makes people better at rationalizing their own flawed decisions. You use your vast intellect to build a totally logical defense for their unacceptable behavior. You shield them from accountability while you quietly absorb all the collateral damage. Section 3. The psychological shift. Breaking the cycle. So how do we actually break out of this? Because willpower alone is never going to be enough. The first and absolutely most critical step is cognitive reframing. The old dialogue of the overthinker is endlessly focused outward, right? Why are they behaving this way? What did I do to cause it? Can I somehow fix them? The transformative question shifts that focus entirely inward. Why am I accepting behavior that harms me? The moment you stop analyzing your partner's dysfunction and start examining your own tolerance patterns, the entire game changes. This simple shift is what immediately restores your personal agency. Which brings us to the 3 steps to recovery. Step 1 is that cognitive reframing we just talked about. Step 2 is boundary formation. This means defining exactly what is acceptable to you, and more importantly, consistently acting on those limits to protect your own psychological integrity. And step 3 is emotional reconnection. From a holistic Unani perspective, this is where you restore balance to your inner spirit, your ruh. You rebuild your identity completely outside of the relationship's validation. You re-engage with your friendships, your passions, and your own intrinsic self-worth. Now, as a smart, capable person, you're likely a natural problem solver. But here is a heavy truth that you really need to let sink in right now. Not every problem is meant to be solved. You absolutely cannot understand a person into changing. You can't overanalyze a toxic dynamic until it magically becomes a healthy one. Sometimes the ultimate solution isn't fixing the puzzle, it's having the wisdom to walk away from the table entirely. Our source material states this incredibly well, and it's something I really hope you carry with you. Healing begins the moment clarity overrides confusion. True psychological strength isn't measured by your stoic ability to endure dysfunction or somehow outsmart your own boundaries. It's measured by your ability to recognize when your continued investment has actually crossed the line into self-betrayal. Healing doesn't wait for the relationship to officially end. It starts the exact second you see the truth clearly and absolutely refuse to unsee it. Which leaves us with one final empowering question for you to really consider today. When will you stop negotiating with pain? When will you stop letting your brilliant, overactive mind talk you out of what you already know in your gut to be true? The intelligence trap is deeply rooted and it's powerful, but your conscious awareness is stronger. When you finally stop negotiating with the reality of your pain and start honoring your truth, that is when the cycle breaks. Thanks for diving into this complex psychological journey with me today. Keep seeking clarity and remember, trust yourself.